Okay, well, I've hit the record button, so I guess we're ready to get started. This is usually one of our longer classes, so I hope y'all have some patience tonight. And also, you've got to listen to me again. Katie Killebrew has COVID. And so she called me yesterday and said she was unable to be here tonight. And I said, okay, I will talk about trees tonight then. So tonight we're going to talk about best management practices for planting, and we're going to go over pruning. So like I said, there's a lot of details in this. So if you have any questions, just stop me, and that includes you all on Zoom. We'll try not to get too distracted. Okay. As we go along so that we get out of here before 10 o'clock tonight. So. All right. Well, there we go. Okay. Well, the first thing I usually tell people is to think about the time that they're going to plant. When is the perfect time to plant trees and shrubs? And that is right now. Okay. Most people think that it's springtime, but when you're talking about woody ornamentals, shrubs, trees, this is the time to be planting those. Our weather is cooling off, or hopefully going to start getting some rain. And so when we look at our type of plant material, we have what's called balled and burlap, and then we have bare root, and we have container trees. So balled and burlap, we say January, February, March, October, November, December are the best times. That's your best window to get those out. Bare root, we usually get in the ground in the early winter or late winter, early spring, between January and March. You can do some in November and December, but the bare root ones tend to survive better being planted in the spring. And then in containerized trees, it says we can plant any time of the year as long as water is available. I kind of disagree with that because from what I've seen, if you go planting a tree or a shrub in July and August, it's just going to burn it up. We're not getting our natural rainfall at that time. And of course, our municipal water is just not good enough for the plants. You know, I guess it's because of the chlorine and the other chemicals that might be in there. Natural rainfall is good. And so as the weather cools off and we get more fall rains, that allows the roots of the plants to get established before they do have to go through one of our harsh summers. So as I said, while spring is most popular, and that's when people are thinking about it, because I know me at this time of the year, it's like, okay, I'm done. I am done with the outside world, just about. I don't want the hot no more. I'm looking forward to blue jeans and sweatshirts, and I'm just done. So, but fall is the best time to plant, and I think it's the best time to get out and work in your yard, to dig and divide those plants, and just do a good cleanup renovation project. So, but it is extremely important to water. I think we talked about that some last week. And October and November can be very dry months. And if we stay in drought conditions, the trees are going to continue, to their immune system just kind of breaks down. But newly planted trees and shrubs, you're making a commitment to water them the first 3 years of their life. So during the dry periods. So don't count on Mother Nature. If you plant your trees and shrubs this fall, make sure you water them in. And also, a large number of plants are killed between leaving the nursery and being planted in your landscape. Because right now, if you're buying trees from the nurseries, they still have the leaves on them, and they'll put them in the back of your truck. I know everybody's seen this, the truck going down the road and the leaves are just bouncing, those poor little trees, okay? They're getting stressed. So you really should wrap the tops with burlap before you put them in the back of the pickup truck, and tie them loosely to kind of protect those leaves from being desiccated. Basically is what's happening. It's blowing off the good leaves and such. So think about, how you're moving your trees from the nursery to the planting site. We do try to work with commercial landscapers and tell them these things, but they don't always listen. So when planting individual plants, it is important to dig the hole not necessarily deeper, but it needs to be wider than the root ball. Okay, and we want to slope the sides of the hole so that new feeder roots are in those top 12 inches and they have room to grow. Now, if you have a really slick clay soil or it's a little damp when you're out planting, I mean, we run into those conditions. Of course, we would want it to be perfect and the soil be, you know, just really diggable, but that's doesn't usually happen in Tennessee. We usually have to wait for rain before we can even dig. So if you have a high clay content soil, I just tell people to dig a big, ugly, shallow hole. So you've got to take and just break up the sides of the hole so it doesn't just glaze over. And that way the roots, it's easier for the roots to get into that parent soil and catch hold of something and start growing. So if they're in a glaze, like they're in a pot, they're just going to grow in a circle. You're going to have girdling roots and the tree probably will start to decline in 5, 6, 7 years. Because sometimes they can live for a little while. But just remember, big ugly hole, doesn't have to be real deep, shallow and wide. All right, so here is my internet connection is unstable. Yes, I know. Okay. All right, so here's a pretty good description of or summary of planting, mulching, and staking the tree. The trunk flare is right here. Okay, you should be able to see the trunk flare after planting. Okay, if your tree looks like a totem pole, and I'm sorry. If your tree looks like a totem pole going straight into the ground, you don't see that natural flare, then you've got it planted too deeply. Okay, and it is important to dig that hole. And the reason I'm saying that is because a lot of landscapers, is the practice that I've noticed over the last 5 years or so, is they're basically planting on top of the soil. They may dig a little shallow hole, but most of the root ball is sitting on top of the ground, and then they cover it with soil, and they cover it with mulch, and then you can't see the trunk flare, and then the tree starts to die, you know, because it's over mulched, it's got too much soil on it. So you do have to get that root ball down in the ground. So if you have landscapers coming to your home and you're watching them while they're doing this, because it can be an expensive process, if they're not digging the holes correctly, you know, don't be afraid to go out there and say, tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, look at this diagram. You're not planting my tree correctly and it's going to die, you know. And if they have a fuss, talk to their boss. So, but you do, because if you plant the trees too deeply, they're going to suffocate, basically. They have not enough, well, the water will stay in there. They can't breathe, all those good things. Staking, we'll go over this a little bit more in detail, but staking is temporary. And I like to see a stake put on either side of the tree. If you've got a sloped area, or maybe you've got high wind where you know that tree is likely to heave, or if you're planting it and it has a full green canopy on it, you may want to think about staking it for that first season. And so we'll get into more details about that. And then your mulch, you do want a good ring of mulch around your trees and about 3 to 4 inches thick. And again, do not bank it up on the tree. And we're going to see some examples here in a little while. So what we call volcano mulching that goes all the way up the trunk, that's a no-no. Okay, you just want a flat circle around the base of the tree, you know, a little bit around that trunk flare just for looks. So it's not like standing out, but just kind of pull that back and make it a level 3 to 4 inches deep. And that's all. Okay, wire basket and burlap. Wire basket and burlap does need to be removed. Now, a lot of tree care people will tell you that no, that holds the tree together. Well, yes, it holds the tree together from the nursery, or, you know, from digging at the nursery to the garden center to your home. Okay, when you put it in the ground, you need to take some wire clippers and clip that wire basket and remove it as much as you can. The balled and burlap trees are usually pretty heavy. And so if we're doing a large planting in town, you know, I work with the city forester a lot, and they will come and dig the holes first, and we'll go in and we will either clip or totally remove those baskets and the burlap so that people can just basically fill them in and plant them. So we try to get them done correctly beforehand, before we have volunteers come in and plant the trees. So remember, take the burlap off. That's going to keep the water from coming down to the roots where the tree needs it. Because if you think about it, at this point, that little tree has left, 50–75% of its root system in the ground at the nursery, okay, because it was dug recently. And so it doesn't have a lot of feeder roots, and the burlap is so thick that it can't get through. Now, if it's a really low quality burlap, which I like better than the high quality because it does break down faster. Okay, but this heavier burlap, it just does not break down. We've gone and looked at trees that have been in the ground, pull them up, burlap, wire basket, everything is intact. The roots never had a chance to grow out into that parent soil. So it is important to prepare your site and prepare that tree for planting. So I was having all kinds of technical issues, bugs. Okay, so there you can see the tree roots. Okay, now when you draw a tree, or if you have kids in school, grandkids maybe, when they bring a tree home, does it look like this? A picture of a tree that they've drawn? No, it have a few stubs coming up here and there. It looks like the top trees that we see all over town. So you have to remember that the root zone goes out beyond the drip line, okay? And your most important roots are going to be all in that circle around, out beyond the drip line, and in the top 6 to 12 inches of the soil. Now, trees do have a tap root, and that helps stabilize them and keep them in the ground. Some trees have a larger tap root than others, but the tree does not depend on that tap root to take in its nutrients and water. It depends on those feeder roots that are out there. So when you drive over them, or you have construction, or somebody, you have to have a water line, or maybe a sidewalk put in, and they cut into this tree, maybe they go right through there, that's definitely going to affect that tree. Okay, in a couple of years, because this side has been impacted, you're going to see this side of the tree start to die out. And you might see branches falling, but you'll see dieback in the canopy. And then before anything, the bark will start sloughing off and things like that. But when you see something going on, dieback in the canopy, you know that something is going wrong underground, and you need to look around the tree and see what has been done. So that's one of the first things I look for when somebody calls and says, well, my tree is dying, or my tree died all of a sudden. It's like, okay, have you had any trenching, any sidewalks built, any driveways, anything, around that tree that could mess with the root zone?
Can you say driving on four-wheeler, also riding lawnmower?
Yes, the heavier the equipment, the worse it's going to be. We had a question in class about the driving over the roots. But yes, I would try to stay away from that as much as possible. So,
How do you for any particular tree?
well, if it's a large tree, I mean, it's just going to keep spreading and spreading. And if you have several trees together, there's just going to be a massive root ball. So one tree, I mean, it's going to go to that drip line and beyond. It just depends on how healthy the tree is, how good your soil is, the water availability, things like that are going to dictate how far those roots are going to come out. I mean, they will go eternally until they run into something like a rock or something. Okay, so this is an example of a proper hole. It was dug shallow and wide rather than narrow and deep. And the tree was set in there. And typically what we do is we lay a shovel across here, and that will measure, you want your shovel to be right there. Then once you pull that burlap and all those wires off, then you can identify the real chunk flare. Because when these are dug in the nursery, again, it's a big piece of machinery, comes down in kind of a cone shape and digs that up, pulls it up out of the ground, and then they put the wire basket or the wire baskets in there. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but the wire basket's put on, then it's wrapped in burlap. So soil comes up around that tree, so it can be above the trunk flare in that ball. And if you don't take that burlap and all those ropes off, you never know that. And so by removing that, you kind of, just gently rake off the soil, find that trunk flare, and then kind of lay your shovel across just to make sure it's level and even. And then you just backfill with the parent soil. So what do y'all think of this one?
It's too deep.
It's the burlap. Too deep. There's some burlap.
Oh, burlap is still on it.
It's got a rope.
That'll string out all by itself.
Yep, right there. You see that burlap going around? That's a strangler. I mean, that tree's not going to make it very long. I mean, it may live a little while, but it's not going to live for long at all. I'm going to see if this is a question. Okay, I do apologize. Our internet is unstable. This hybrid programs are hard to do. I'm sorry. Yeah, we've just got a weak signal out here. Okay, again, identify that plant or the trunk flare on the tree. The trunk flare is where those roots spread at the base of the tree, like we discussed earlier. These are exposed. You don't want the roots to be exposed, at planting time or within those first couple of years. So that means that tree was planted a little bit high. So we would have wanted to plant it a little bit deeper, make sure that it was all covered with soil, and then mulched on top of that. The picture on your left or your right, you can see where it kind of almost turns. You see how it goes in the soil? And we call that a J root. And sometimes they come out of the nursery like that. And it's got roots on this side and none on the other, because it's got that kind of J shape for whatever reason, and it won't grow roots out on this side. And so that's going to make it an unstable tree in the long run. I mean, you could have possibly done a little bit of manipulation to the root system to spread it out before planting.
If you note this after it's up, like our property was built in and it's kind of new, and we see some of the trees that are like that, been like that now for about a year. Can we recover it, or is it no good?
After they've been in the ground for about a year, I mean, it depends on the size of them.
It's a new property that they
Yeah.
just bulldozed stuff out
No.
of, and now some of the roots are showing.
Yeah.
Can we go over and toss some dirt down there?
Yeah, I would go ahead and just add some soil
it's-
to it
it's a
rather
big
than try
tree.
to move it.
Oh, we're
Yeah.
not gonna move it. We just
Yeah.
want to make sure that when we add the soil, we're
Yeah.
gonna kill
Just no more than about 3 to 4 inches of soil.
it. And make sure that we still see that trunk.
And yeah, what trunk flare it has, you can, yeah. Okay, so in poorly drained soils, and I think this is where the landscapers got the idea in their head that they could plant a tree right on top of the soil surface. So in poorly drained soils, you can dig the hole 1 to 2 inches shallower than the root ball. And that way it will sit up a little bit higher. So that allows for the water to drain away from the roots. Then after planting, they cover the exposed part with the soil and mulch. So this same technique can be used to plant azaleas, rhododendrons, and other plants that are susceptible to root rot and that definitely do not like to be planted too deeply or have wet feet. This also works better in an irrigated environment. If you're going to water your trees or you have an irrigation system, to raise them up a little bit. But again, the planting hole wider than deep. 1 hole, 1 tree, no amendments added to the backfill, no matter how bad your parent soil is. If you're going to group trees or you're preparing a whole bed where you're ripping up the soil, tilling it up, and maybe doing a large area, then you can amend that whole area with some compost if needed. But if you're just doing 1 hole, 1 tree, just try to put put back the natural backfill that was there. No additives and no fertilizer.
Can I
Okay,
have,
this is
ask a
an
question?
example of the planting on top of the ground, basically. Those trees were about somewhere between 3 to 5 years old when I went and saw them. They were definitely in decline. It was the middle of summer. The stakes had been left on there for too long, and so the staking was kind of biting into the tree. Actually, the tree was growing around the staking material. When you guy wire like this, I just don't like it. It does not work well, especially if you're talking urban trees and parks and things like that, because it is a tripping hazard. And those stakes sticking out like that, you know, you think about you're running across the park, you know, maybe you're going out to catch a football or whatever. It's very easy to run into one of those and get hurt. And so I like it's just one stake on either side with the taunt lines pulling them back. But these plants, again, you need to work with your landscaper to make sure they're planted correctly. Most landscape companies will put in the contract that they will guarantee a tree for a year if they plant it. Okay, so if they don't plant it, you plant it, you're on your own if that tree dies. So, and normally it is at least half the cost of the tree itself to have them planted. So it might be good insurance to let them go ahead and plant the trees and watch and make sure that they're not going into decline, catch it before that year is up if they are, and say, hey, you need to come back and replace my tree.
Carl, I'd like
So
to
this
ask
was
a
another
question.
one where the trees were just planted too deeply. I don't know if they were on the surface or what, but this was the most compacted soil that I had seen. And then they had rocks and landscape fabric. Now, this is a good example of the landscape fabric was so tight around those trees that the trunk was just being choked out. Okay, these are maple trees. They have sun scald, which is the splitting of the bark, usually the southwest facing side of these thin bark trees. And that usually starts during the winter when the sun comes out and it warms up a little bit and the sap rises, and then it goes back down to freezing overnight and it contracts. So you've got expanding and contraction. And you really don't notice it until the summertime when the sun is beating down on it really hard, and then those cracks start to open up. And there's a couple different things that you can do. You can paint the trunks of the trees a light colored paint, like a white latex paint. And that actually helps to keep the trunk cooler. And that way you don't get that expanding and contracting. So white is usually what we recommend, but if you want to paint your trees pink, go for it. So, but these were in a very stressed situation. There was probably 30 trees all together. They all looked this way. They were outside of the landscape contract. And so there was no going back to the landscaper and having them replace these trees. There was water available right there. He had a pond right there. They had not been watering the trees either. So a lot of things went wrong, I mean, on this project. So the trees had bores, they had cracks, they were in compacted soil, and they were dying. And so he eventually ended up having to take out and replace a lot of trees. So a little bit of planning in advance is always helpful. So here's your quiz. How many errors can you spot in this picture?
The flare is underground.
Okay, the flare is underground.
All is not there.
Opened.
Open, whatever's holding it, taken off.
Right, looks like the burlap is still on there.
Encourage the bottom roots to spread. Instead of vertical bulb versus normal veg.
Yep.
Staked out.
Got some crazy guy wiring on there, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay, so there, I think you guys got most of them. One, the hole was dug too deeply and then backfilled. If you have to backfill, if you accidentally dig a hole too deep, that's, you know, it happens. Take the backfill and make sure you get in there and stomp it down so that the tree does not sink after it's been put in there. So trunk flare is below the grade. The guy wires too tightly. You've got to allow that trunk some sway. Okay, it has to sway in the wind to build up its trunk strength.
I have a question about that, 'cause I thought that was really interesting. How
Okay.
does it build its, I'm a therapist, so.
Okay.
I'm interested in this, right? How does it build its strength?
I guess it's just like us. I mean, it's almost like using a muscle. The hormones in the tree, when it moves, the hormones go to that area of growth. And also you usually have some stems that are feeding it at that level. You leave those there for a few years and that helps to add to the trunk strength too. So I think it's just that movement that makes them grow stronger, and it's more, it's better attached at the ground level to the root zone. Okay, we've seen that the hole was not as wide as we would have recommended. The wires are directly touching the tree, which you don't want. Okay, so that covers that. Okay, so soil improvement, I think we talked about this a little bit last week with our herbaceous plants. Same thing, if you're installing groups of trees or shrubs, doing a foundation planting, make sure you prepare that soil uniformly before planting, and your plantings will be more successful. So get your soil test, see what nutrients are going to be needed according to what you're going to plant. After you receive the soil test, or you can even do this before, but I would take the soil test samples before you amend with anything. Send that off. Then you can take about, dig it down to about 8 to 10 inches, add about 2 to 3 inches of organic matter across the whole area and till that in again. Then when you get your soil test results back, if it calls for nutrients or it calls for lime, go ahead and put that in at that point and till it in or dig it in with a shovel. And then you want to rake that surface smooth and make sure that you don't have any holes and divots. And so then the planting bed is ready to plant. So. Okay, rarely is it recommended to add organic matter to that individual planting hole. Now this area is totally different. I mean, this is a street well, it's a container. And this is one of the reasons that our street trees don't live maybe 10 to 15 years and they have to be taken out and replaced. And so you're going to be seeing some of that. And I imagine Catherine would have addressed this tonight. But down on Franklin Street and Strawberry Alley, you've probably seen a lot of the older trees removed and replaced with newer, better varieties. That's because those trees had been down there 20 years or so, and they had just outgrown their roots, or their area where they could grow the roots, so it's full. You also run into utility problems. We found out that probably not going to be able to plant trees back on Riverside because of the water mains and some other utilities that are underneath the ground. And so they're looking at maybe doing shrubs or baskets or something to beautify the roadside. But as for the existing wells that are there, they're not going to be able to plant the trees back in those exact spots. So that's kind of a challenge that I know Katie's going through right now. So, but if you have extremely, extremely, extremely hard clay soil, you can add some backfill. What I would do is I would take the backfill that you dug out of the ground, maybe put it in a wheelbarrow or a pile, add your compost, organic matter, and mix that up, okay? Because you don't want different sizes of soil aggregates, basically. And what happens is you'll get a big clod of soil, and then there'll be an air pocket in by there. And so where it lands by a root and you have an air pocket, that part of that root's going to dry out, and then it's going to start to die back. And so you just want to keep that soil structure pretty uniform and even, and not have clods and air pockets and things like that.
Excuse me, why did they take down all the cherry trees?
Those were dying. They had a bacterial shot hole disease. And they were getting in the power lines. I'm not sure. I'm not in on that. I was there for when those trees were planted, though. You probably were too. So, but yeah, that was 20 some years ago that those cherry trees were planted. Yeah. So, okay, one, on purchasing plants, you want to purchase plants from a reputable nursery or garden center. Of course, as an extension agent, I cannot recommend one over the other. Usually if somebody calls, I'll give them 3 or 4 names of nurseries around town. And then it's kind of up to you to just go and inspect. Walk around the nursery, look at the plants. I like to pop them out of their containers and see what's going on.
Can you say that there are some in town that are distinctly better than others?
I can't really say that. I will get in trouble.
You even say if there's a bad one, huh?
I can't.
No grading system like food.
Well,
No, like, you know, go to this restaurant, this sort of.
there kind of is, but I've got to watch myself on that because usually I can go out to a landscape and once I see the trees that have been recently planted and dying, I'll have an idea in my head. I know who did this, and I'll ask, and I'll be like, so. But anyway, we did go to a nursery the other day, and one of their little tricks is to take a small plant, like a 1 gallon, put it in a 3 gallon container, put some soil over it, and sell it as a 3 gallon plant. Okay, so you're talking $5 compared to $20 or whatever. So that's my reasoning between popping it, hitting it on the side of the container, kind of pop it out a little bit. If it comes out and it's a 1 gallon plant stuck in there, you know, that's probably not a plant you want to take home with you. So
For that price anyway.
for that price, yes, I think I would argue and say this is a 1 gallon plant. I'm not going to pay.
Just so you know.
Just so you know. Yes.
I'll buy the dirt
that's-
separate.
Yes. So you've got to watch all the nursery people. They all have their little tricks to sell the products that are on their lots, you know. So secondly, choose plants that will grow in a selected area of the garden. So like we talked about last week, if you have full sun, you're going to select full sun plants. If you have shade, you're going to take plant plants that like a little bit of shade. So because many times we see a pretty plant at the center, at the garden center or at the plant sale, and we just take it home and we plant it where we want it, and it's not the best place for it. So you've got to look at what it requires before planting it in your landscape. But do make sure that you inspect the leaves, the branches, the stems, and the roots to ensure that the plants are healthy and they have vigorous growth. When you do pop that plant out of its container, the roots should be kind of whitish or yellowish color. They should look healthy. They should not be gooey and black and have a smell to them. Okay, that's a definite sign that something's wrong. Believe me, start going around garden centers. You'll see what I mean. You'll see what I mean. You're going to be out there popping them plants out and looking at them now. So
We'll make our own list, damn it.
Carla told us to do it. Okay, what was your question?
I have a really hard time distinguishing between part shade, full shade, parts, you know, they have a lot of parts, you know, it's not like, and then I have a canopy over where I'm trying to garden because I'm trying to do it kind of in a wooden area. But
Okay.
it's not heavy wooded.
So you've probably got kind of a filtered or a dappled
Yeah,
sun.
like a small canopy. It's not a thick canopy. It's like a light. So it's
Yeah.
dappled. It's perfect.
Yeah, dappled.
I don't think they have a dappled name in there when I go
Yeah.
look for plants.
Be low
shade.
shade plant, semi-shade might be what you'll see on the tag. Semi-shade or shade loving
Yeah,
plants.
yeah, I see part shade, part sun.
Yeah.
Part full shade, just
Yeah,
a bunch of different shades. That's all I
Yes.
can find.
yes.
I don't know which shade I'm supposed to go for.
Right. I understand. It can be challenging. It really can. Just try to do your best. A lot of it can be trial and error too.
I can tell. I can walk around my garden and tell. It's trial and error.
Okay, plants that have been grown in containers or pots, they kind of need special handling to ensure their proper survival in the landscape. And think about the fact that these containerized trees have been sitting out on the lot at the garden center, and they are being watered 1 or 2 times a day if they're lucky, if they're at a good garden center. And so they're kind of spoiled to being watered once or twice a day. Okay, so when you take them home and you put them in your landscape and you leave them out there for a week with no water, they're probably not going to look very good at the end of the week. Okay, so you're going to need to water them thoroughly every day, and then back off until you're doing it like every 3rd day, every 2nd day, you know, until you're watering thoroughly once a week. Okay, because you've got to encourage those roots to grow. And so so those plants are spoiled when you put them out in your landscape. And that's why you see transplants shock within the first 2 weeks if you're not watering regularly. So water them before you plant so that they're good and moist. If you do have a root bound tree, you can take your spade or shovel or a sharp knife and just cut into the root ball. And that's not going to kill the tree. It's going to actually, it will encourage new feeder roots to come out on that tree. So just don't be afraid to cut it up. I usually take a shovel. I like using a spade because it's more narrow. And I'll just lay the tree down on the ground and I'll just take the shovel and I'll knock it through the roots, flip it over, knock it through the roots again, and pull that apart, then put it in the ground and plant. So, but just make sure you're using a sharp knife, clean tools, so that you're not spreading disease in plant. Okay, here's your machine that is used to dig plants. And of course, the one on the top, that's going to be getting those larger trees. And then, of course, they have smaller ones for, you know, shrubs and things like that, or the smaller B&B plants. So this would be what it looked like in a nursery setting when they go to dig trees. And right now, they're probably waiting for the first freeze before they go in to dig them. They would like, well, in a perfect world, we would like for those trees to be in complete dormancy before they're dug in the fall. And so that's why you don't see your trees hitting the lots until later on in the year, in October, November. And some of our garden centers, they just don't bother with them at that time of the year. So you have to go to a nursery, or you may have to travel to McMinnville, you know, to get those trees that you want to plant. So unfortunately, the garden centers just don't have a very good selection in the fall when it's time to plant. So, and also just remember that the B&B balled and burlap trees can be very heavy because they do have a ball of soil, roots, plus the plant itself. Bare root plants, I like these because they're small, they're easy to plant. You don't have to have a very deep hole, a very large hole at all. Like roses, grapes, any of those with the bare roots, or like what we hand out around Arbor Day. Arbor Day is the first Friday in March, and so we always do a tree handout. Not sure exactly what we're going to do it this year. We've had a really good system with a drive-through system on picking up your trees the last couple of years. COVID kind of put us into that mode where we couldn't have a lot of people getting out of their cars and commingling and things like that. So what the tree board did is we came up with the idea that we put the tree species names on a card. And so you have a greeter that would meet you. We did it at Smith Traherne Mansion through there last year. And so somebody would greet you, give you your list and a pencil, and you would mark off the species that you want, and then you drive through and you hand it to another volunteer. They go get your trees, bring it back to your car, and then you just zoom on out. So we're going to do it at one of the parks this year because we had traffic jams clear down to Riverside. We got very popular this year. So we learned some new tricks that it went really well, but a lot of people came out to get free trees. So, but this year, I think we've got over 2,000 trees coming in that we're going to be giving away. So I will be sending out email reminders, both for volunteers and if you want to come and get trees for that day. So another thing on the bare root plants, make sure you keep the root system moist. If you only have to wait a couple days and you've only got like, 2 or 3, 5 trees, just stick them in your refrigerator if they'll fit. If they're not great big long whips, if they're really small, just kind of stick them in the refrigerator until you're ready to plant them. If it's going to be several weeks before you think you're ready, then you'll want to put them outside and heel them in with mulch. And that just means lay them down put some mulch over the top and keep them watered. Okay. And then 24 hours before you're ready to plant, take those little seedlings and put them in a bucket of water and let them soak in water overnight before you plant. Okay. And you can put a little bit of Rutone or something like that in there, a starter fertilizer, a little rooting hormone in your water, but not high. You do not want high nitrogen because nitrogen will burn those little roots. So something high in phosphorus and potassium would be okay, but no nitrogen. And it's usually not necessary to prune woody ornamentals at planting time. It used to be kind of a myth that the top had to match the bottom. Now that's not necessarily true. After you've bought the tree, if you find that you've got crisscrossing branches or you've got broken branches, things like that, yes, take those off at planting time. Make those corrective pruning cuts. But otherwise, that tree is going to need all its foliage that spring, when spring comes along, it's going to need all that foliage to go through photosynthesis and feed the roots. Okay, so you don't want to prune the roots or the top to where they match. Okay, just only prune out what's broken. I mean, really, if you have a really wonky branch that's crooked. So, and then, yeah, pretty much covers that one. Proper mulching, of course, is important. 2 to 3 inch layer, 4-inch layer is about as thick as you can go. If you get to 6 inches, you're going to start cutting into your water and air flow in the ground. Okay, you're going to start suffocating that tree. And of course, we do not want to volcano mulch. So mulch is good for, holding in the water, makes it look better. So it's aesthetically a sound thing to do. And it also keeps your weed eaters and lawnmowers away from the base of that tree. And it reduces the competition with the grass because the grass will suck the water away. I mean, it will steal the water from that tree. Okay, and especially if it's a young tree. So get rid of the grass, mulch. But usually use an organic mulch. Do not use the weed barrier fabric or plastic, anything like that. And
So I have a question about that. What is the topic you had?
then you can, if it's, you're probably gonna have to start cutting it and removing it. Especially if you start to see your plants decline, I would pull back the mulch and look at the weed barrier fabric or plastic. And if it's choking the stem, the trunk of the plant, you're going to have to cut it. Just take a utility knife or something and cut it. And I'd remove it. I'd start removing it a little bit at a time. Because what happens is kind of just like this. This tree was mulched too deeply. You can see by 6-8 inches, maybe more. Okay. And so this is starting to get soft underneath there. Okay. So you're encouraging crown rot or cankers, you're encouraging diseases, and the tree is just simply not going to do well. So, but you can repair that, pull that mulch off, put about half of it on another tree or use it somewhere else in your yard. A lot of times they will recover from this. We've taken air spades before and just literally blown the mulch and the soil away and found trees, that were like 12 inches too deep before we could find a flare. So it's very important not to plant deeply. So watering again is essential. Make sure you water at planting time. And then, as I said earlier, the first 3 years of that tree's life, you're going to have to be ready to water, add supplemental water during droughty, dry periods. And that's because the first 3 years, you're really concentrating on the root zone, getting those roots established. And then once those roots have caught on, then you're going to see a burst of growth up top. Okay. So, they work together. You got to have leaves for photosynthesis and to get those nutrients down to the roots. But you're going to see more root growth the first 3 years than you will above ground growth. So But as I said, oxygen levels can get low and suffocate the plant. So a good rule of thumb is about once a week, but I want you to water that root ball where it's getting soaked 6 to 8 inches down, just to make sure you're wetting that entire root ball. So, oh, and the light frequent watering is harmful because the soil surface stays wet and it's dry down below. So those roots are going to be reaching up into the mulch or up toward the weed barrier fabric if you've got that. And that's not what you want. You want deep, thorough watering to where those roots are really going to get down in the soil and hang on. So staking trees, that's an additional management problem. As I said, I hate to see trees staked like this, especially in a high pedestrian area. Very much a tripping hazard. So this is guying, is a form of staking by putting those guy wires down. Okay, but you don't always have to stake a tree. If you have winds, the soil conditions, you have a slope, the tree size, especially the canopy. If it has a heavy canopy, it's going to require staking. And then make sure that those stakes are removed after 1 season, 2 seasons at the most, because by the end of the first season, it should have enough roots established in the soil that it's going to hold its own. Okay, and so as you go on, the tree will, grows in diameter, gets bigger and bigger around, and so it grows into that staking material. Now on the picture A there, that's just no. Okay, if you've got a tree and it comes with that little cane pole attached to it, again, that was for shipping and handling, to make sure that that tree did not get broke in between shipping and handling. You need to cut the wire, plastic, whatever they've got it attached with. Okay, you need to take that off, get rid of that cane. And I like using a fence post on either side. And you take an old water hose, cut it off into about 6-8 inch lengths, run your wire through that water hose, and then the water hose is what's touching the tree. And then you take your wire, hook it to your fence post, so you're pulling this way, and then on the other direction, you're going back the other way. And so you've got it to where it's pulling, it's kind of taut, but again, you have that wiggle, and so that it can build up the trunk strength. And also helps in developing that taper at the base. So the guy wiring, letter C there, just don't like it. It's usually done so tight. When I see this, the trees are like so tight they can't move. And again, that tripping hazard. I mean, we've put them up in parks before. We've had to paint the stakes yellow, tie ribbons on them and different things like that, because kids running are not going to look. I mean, even adults running may not look, and that hurts when you hit your ankle on it. Here's one that's been properly staked, and it's got a tree bag, a watering bag, a gator bag, that's what they call it. Okay, now these are good. They come up 10, 20 gallon. I think the basic size is about a 20 gallon bag. And so you fill it up with water and it seeps out from the bottom. Okay, and so it slowly waters that tree. And so you can go in and just fill that up once or twice a week, and it just slowly waters your tree. You can hook these together. Most of them have a zipper on them. You can hook them together. So like if you got a really big tree that may need 40 gallons at a time for watering, you just zip those together. But remember, the water goes in the bag, not in between. And this comes from, you laugh, this is a true story. We were planting trees down at what is now Liberty Park, back before it was just Fairgrounds Park. And we had been putting the bags on the trees and all that, and watching this guy with the water truck, and he's supposed to be putting water in the bag, okay, in the bag. Well, I see all this water flowing, and I'm like, well, there must be something wrong with that bag. It's got a hole in it. I go over there, and he's standing there, and he's got it in between the bags where he's watering in between the bag. He's watering the tree for sure, but he wasn't getting any water in the bag. So I was like, okay, you gotta put the hose in the bag. You can't make this stuff up, I swear. You can't. So here's an improperly staked tree. I hope my voice stays with me for the rest of the evening. But you can see on the wires here, it's all loose. It's kind of haphazard. If you put the, what do you call that, the hose, the plastic hose around the base of it, that is used as a protectant, but it needs to be removed also because the trees will grow into those and then they cut into them and cause all kinds of problems. So this would be kind of an improperly planted tree. You can see by the narrow, the greenway there where it's planted, it doesn't have much room to grow. It's going to be in the street was my first thought when I seen it. It's going to be growing out into the street. So that poor little tree doesn't have much of a chance. Trunk wrapping. Okay, most trees are wrapped at the nursery to prevent injury during shipment, or they will leave the wraps on them while they're sitting on the nursery lot or in the garden center. This is another thing that I check before I buy a tree, is I will take that wrapping off and look underneath and make sure that there's no bugs, there's no cracks, you know, things that somebody doesn't want you to see before you take that tree home. So, yeah, they don't like me coming into the nurseries. But you're making an investment is the way I look at it. And so if they're not willing to do it for you, get your pocket knife out. Take a peek. But these wraps can be made out of burlap, paper sacks, a lot of old dog food sacks is what they use, but it should be removed after the tree is planted in your landscape or its final destination. We can do light tree wraps. They have, it's just kind of like, what do you call it? It's just a white ribbon that you just basically wrap around the tree loosely, and that will help to protect those thin bark trees from the cracking and the splitting. Or we can paint, you know, like we said earlier. But again, any of those things is a temporary measure. You've got to remove them. You may have to, if you have deer pressure, you have a lot of deer, you may actually have to get protective tubes or make some screens to go around those trees so that the deer aren't in there rubbing on the bark and eating the bark. So you can just, you can buy some wire, make your own, just cut it into pieces and, you know, make one about yay big around and put it around the tree. So that just gives some added protection. And also, I've heard people say to take the yellow bags from the grocery store, like the yellow plastic bags, for some reason that color they don't like, but anything that flutters and makes movement can kind of scare the deer away. And dial, or what was that, ivory? No, not ivory. Irish Spring soap. For some reason they do not like that. So if you just take a pair of pantyhose and shave off some of the soap in that and hang them on your trees, that also deters the deer from getting into your tree. But just like everything, they're creatures of habit and they get used to it. So fertilizing woody ornamentals, we do not recommend that you fertilize at planting unless it is a zero nitrogen, a low phosphorus potassium type fertilizer would be okay. Then after it's been in the ground for a year, then you're going to follow your soil test recommendations and fertilize accordingly. But most ornamental plants are going to grow best when the pH is between 5.5 and 7.0. Again, research the plants that you are planting, and you know, thank goodness we've got Google, or we wouldn't know anything these days, or YouTube. You know, but your azaleas and things like that are going to be more acid loving. A dogwood likes a little bit more acidic soil than maybe a maple tree. Okay, and most people think that, okay, I've got an evergreen. Evergreens like acidic soil. Not necessarily. Arborvitae, boxwood, Leland cypress, all like more of an alkaline soil. And so if it's in an acidic soil, that's just going to cause problems. The nutrients aren't going to be available. The trees are going to do poorly. So research what you're going to plant, do your soil test, and start fertilizing a year, one season in. Okay. So if you have a good lawn maintenance program that may eliminate the need for supplemental fertilizer, if you're fertilizing your grass, you don't need to make a couple extra rounds around the tree to make sure that it gets some extra fertilizer. Without testing, just if you're fertilizing your lawn, you're probably doing okay. If you notice the tree has poor growth, it's light colored, maybe it just doesn't look very happy at all, then maybe it does need some fertilizer. Okay. But if it looks like it's growing well, if the vigor is good, you can look at the growth. Young trees should grow at about 9 to 12 inches per year. Okay, so you can see that new terminal growth. It will be a lighter color, maybe a slicker brown, and the older wood will be more of a darker gray to brown. So young trees, if they're getting 9 to 12 inches of terminal growth, mature trees 6 to 9 inches of growth per year, it's probably fine. It probably doesn't need the extra fertilizer. And if it looks bright green or dark green, you probably don't need anything. So don't waste your money and don't pollute the environment by adding fertilizer if you don't need to. So, and fertilize in the late winter, very early spring. So that means February, March, April. Usually we want to April, even going into May, you can fertilize into May. But usually June, we start in with our drought. And so you don't want to put fertilizer out during the droughty hot months because fertilizers are salts and salts are going to dehydrate. So you're just going to have to water more. So do your fertilization early in the season. February. I don't like going to July. Usually most people say do not fertilize after July 4th. So that is a good rule of thumb, but I usually stop in June. So let's see. And when you're putting the application out, go about 3 foot from the trunk. You're getting out to that drip line, the edge of the canopy. You don't want to put it right up on the trunk or it can burn and cause cankers and things like that on the tree. So you're going to come out to where those roots are growing. Now, remove any tags or labels. Again, anything that's tied onto the tree, it's going to grow into and probably cause the tree to girdle. And so what you can do is kind of maybe do you a little landscape design and draw out and put, tape the labels to a piece of paper where that tree is, or write down. I used to save all my labels and I gave up. But if you have some kind of a notebook or something to keep track of what you planted when and what the variety was, you'll know, okay, this tree did good, I maybe want to plant another one, or this tree did terrible, I know what it is, I know what variety it was, it died, it didn't work, I'm not planting it again. So again, water your newly planted trees about once a week. Those container trees are going to be susceptible to drought when first planted, so make sure that you're watering them every day and then just kind of backing off. I swear I don't have COVID. Okay, I already kind of went over that, but the first 2 to 3 years, you're going to be looking at developing the root zone. Oh goodness, listen, I'm going to have to take a break, guys. Let's take about a 10-minute break.
I called my son right.
I don't know, because and then you called me and I didn't answer the recommendation. But that's your number? That's not the same number I see. I don't know. You called.
I don't know. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, Ellen, shots last night.
permanently best plan. No, it's right. And they didn't wonder who called you because it was just kind of. Not an issue. Oh, now I know what went wrong. No, and then I called you when you're there and you go through, I didn't check the number. I know, I'm like, oh.
I always feel so bad after I get a flu shot.
Yeah, I know.
It's fun sometimes. The line.
So you got your flu shot already?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I do have an announcement. We've got some pasta left over from the plant sale. So if you are interested in going and getting a hospital real quick, Miss Betty has them out in her car. Betty, follow her.
I'm following Miss Betty.
Go grab you a hospital or two. She had several left over. I'd be willing, but I don't have any. Three.
I have a lot of checks.
Three hospitals. Three hospitals. Three hospitals.
A minute. Long. We need about 2 more of me.
That sounds like you do a lot.
Yeah, it's just right now we're shorthanded and we're going into reporting time. So it's like, get these things wrapped up, get evaluations done, start planning what we're going to be doing next year.
Yeah, I don't have a job right now, so it really helps.
Okay. Okay. We're going to be hiring an extension agent if you've got a degree.
So I got a computer information system.
Oh, okay.
I'm smart. I learned stuff. It's interesting.
Yeah, they're going to be hiring somebody to do livestock and forages. And they'll deal with some row crops and stuff. So.
Oh, livestock is not so fun.
I know.
Chickens going on.
Mhm.
That's kind of fun.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I always did like having chickens.
It's our first time. Half a dozen eggs a day, so
Mhm.
it's going really well. There's
Mhm.
7 chickens.
Oh, wow. One of
used.
them's not laying.
Just don't know which one.
Yep. Usually you can start to recognize after a while whose eggs are whose
They're
by the colors,
all
the speckles.
they
Oh.
lay in one nest box. Sometimes they lay in a second
Mhm.
nest box. So we go to the drop the other day. There's just 6 eggs chilling out.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure which chicken's not doing it. Start
Oh, that's
isolating
funny.
one and seeing if it's cool.
Mhm.
So, you know, eventually we might get 7 eggs. But,
You might. There might be a rooster.
oh no, they're all.
We had that happen one time too. We had one that turned out to be a rooster. He started.
There's no fertilized eggs yet. So
Yeah.
you gotta crack open an egg and there's a little chicken inside that might be traumatized.
Mhm. Are they back inside yet? Are they back inside?
No, they're probably out there smoking.
Okay, so let's try this again. Maybe I can make it through the rest with my voice. So I did throw this in because we have a lot of interest in home orchards. And so I also do a program, we've stopped for the year, but it's called Slow Your Roll, Plan Before You Plant. Okay, and this came about because of people always coming into the extension office and like, the first one was like, I planted 100 acres of blueberries and now they're not doing very well. What? Did you run a soil test? No. Did you amend the soil with anything? No. So it's like, slow your roll, plan before you plant. But now we don't have a lot of commercial orchards in Montgomery County. We really don't have any. We have a couple that are establishing right now, and hopefully in 3 to 5 years, we will have a source of apples and peaches and stuff like that here in Montgomery County, because I do have a couple farmers that I'm working with on that. Apples, we have the Head Farm. Oh gosh, it's Tom Head, Adams, Tennessee. Forget the name of the farm, it's left me, but they have an apple farm up there. If you're looking for fresh cider or apples, I would try to think of the name.
What was the name again?
It's the Heads.
Okay.
The Heads is their last name. Tom Head. I don't think it's Head Family Farms. That's different. She's the one that's just putting in an orchard. Sarah. Shade Tree.
Yeah.
Shade Tree Orchards. Okay. Yeah. Tom and Sarah Head Shade Tree Orchards. So they are open right now, and they grow a lot of their apples, but they also purchase apples from East Tennessee, where they tend to grow a little bit better than they do here. We have a lot of disease and insect pressure in in Tennessee, and so that it makes it hard to grow fruit. So you want to begin by preparing the site 1 year before planting. And so if you're planning on putting out a large number, I mean, even 10, 15, 20, that's a lot of fruit trees. So you want to start planning a year in advance. So you're not going to start planning right now to plant in March of next year. Okay. You would be thinking about 2024, because you want to make sure that you look at your site. Is it accessible? Are you going to be able to pick the apples off of it? What's the slope like? I mean, we can have apples on a sloped area, but you don't want the slope to be too much, or your equipment, you're not going to be able to get up and down and to the trees to pick the fruit. Look at the soil characteristics. A home orchard does not need a really fertile soil, which is really good here in Tennessee. So if you have a rocky soil, maybe a cherty soil, that would be a perfect area to grow apple trees. A northeast facing slope is best, and that's because when the sun comes up in the east in the morning, it's going to dry out that orchard, and then it gets the full gamut of the sunlight throughout the day. So you want to run your rows north to south, but you want a northeast facing slope where it warms up quickly. Now, on putting in an orchard, you're going to do your soil preparation a little bit differently. You need to sample the upper 8 inches of your soil, and then you also need to sample from a 14 to 16 inch depth. Okay. Now, this is really recommendations for commercial growers, but I do tell homeowners, if they're going to put out a lot of trees, that they'll want to do this also. And sometimes you need heavy equipment to come in and deep incorporate those amendments to rip the soil. And get it down there where you can pull samples from about a 14-inch depth. And then you're going to put your amendments in that hole as as deep as you can, and then backfill and plant. But you want to address drainage issues. You don't want a site that is a low area, because the air will drain into that site, and the cold air settles in the hollows, and in the valleys. So you don't want an area where you're going to have that going on. Order your plants well in advance of time to plant. There are a lot of different places that you can buy from. We have Starks Brothers that is in Missouri. They've been around for hundreds of years and have bred different fruit varieties. And so that is a good source. But if you have Gurney's catalogs and things like that, usually I end up buying mine online because you can't find the small bare root trees in the stores. So you end up ordering them online. And so when you're doing fruit trees, you want to start out with a bare root, because you're going to get a what we call a whip. And if it has any branches on it, you're going to cut those branches off. You're going to tip the top of it to where you just have a stick, and you're going to plant it in the ground. And then that second year, then you're going to start pruning and keeping pruning for the lateral branches that you want to keep, that are going to be your fruiting branches and such. And then prune every year. So, but it is important to get down deep in the soil, deep incorporate those amendments. Eliminate noxious weeds. If you have old fruit trees or vines, I would go ahead and remove them, because if you start intermixing a planting, you're going to have diseases and insects that carry over. Okay. With your vining crops or cane bearing, like your blackberries, raspberries, you'll want to remove any wild blackberries that are nearby, any multiflora rose, because those can carry insects and diseases back and forth. But typically, if you have an older orchard, you just don't want to mix small trees and big trees, the small trees and big trees. It just makes it a management nightmare, especially if you're going through spraying with large equipment. So if they're older fruit trees, they've pretty much given it up, just go ahead and cut them down and just start new. Order plants well in advance. So if you're planning on putting out 200 or 300 trees, you need to get a hold of your company, get those plants ordered ahead of time. And also build your trellises and install the irrigation before planting, because it's hard to do after you've planted. And irrigation is critical. You may think that it's an expense that you don't need, but when your trees are out there in the middle of July and August, and they're starting to die on you, and they're suffering, and you're having to hand water, or put a 55-gallon drum in the back of a side-by-side, or something like that, and having to water those plants, you're going to wish that you'd put an irrigation line in. So but plant late winter, early spring, and bare root is your best bet there. You want to choose disease-resistant varieties, and these, we do have some lists available. You may want to send me an email if you are curious, because I have some of the old publications that are not online anymore, but still have some good recommendations. So if you are interested in varieties, just shoot me an email and say, hey, send me that list of varieties to choose from. You do want cross-pollination to occur, so that means selecting different varieties that bloom at the same time. Okay, so you may have a early spring blooming plant, you may have a mid and a late season, and that just helps you stretch out your harvest season a little bit. But you want to make sure that you have certain varieties that are blooming at the same time, so that they can cross-pollinate. So all of our fruit is insect pollinated, and so our bees are very important. Our native pollinators are very important, and that's why you've got to watch your spray schedules very closely at the times that you spray. So the success or failure of a planting is often determined before the plants are ever even set out in the field, especially if you haven't done your homework, you haven't, done your pre-work on it, then it's going to be a little bit harder to manage. And if you're feeling a little discouraged, I always say buy local. Visit the farmer's market, visit the peach truck, places like that grow it in large amounts, and they'll bring it here to you. So, and I think of regional or local, regional, 150 miles from Montgomery County is still kind of, at least it's a regional, local. Peaches. Okay, from Illinois. Okay. Yeah.
Summer.
Okay. Well, sure. I've been buying mine from one of our master gardeners, David Baker. He gets them from somewhere in Georgia.
I get mine from Bowling Green.
Mhm.
They have a really nice orchard there, really a good fit for apples and peaches there. And they have a growing thing in there. Nice wineries around there. It's a good weekend. Huh?
For Campbell.
Oh,
So they knew where the farms were,
Yeah.
where the old apple trees.
Yeah. And there's some old pears out there that look half dead that will just be, dripping literally with pears. So some of the older varieties are not so bad. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about pruning and hopefully get finished up here pretty soon. So why do you prune? Pruning is a practice that can help maintain the health, the vigor of a tree, and it keeps that desirable shape and size. But keep in mind that a tree has DNA, just like us. It's going to determine what size that it is based on its parents. So an oak tree, its DNA is going to tell it I'm supposed to grow 70 foot tall. If I'm in a happy place, I'm going to grow 70 foot tall. Even if you top that tree, you prune it hard, it's still going to try to grow 70 foot. Okay. So it's hard to manipulate the larger trees. And we see a lot of improper pruning practices because people want that tree to stay small. Well, maybe the wrong tree was planted in the wrong place, things like that. So another reason that we prune is to maintain the plant health. You want to remove the dead, damaged, diseased tissues. We want to improve the appearance of the plant by training it. I had a home visit the other day, or a farm visit. A gentleman and his wife are wanting to put in a high intensity apple orchard. Okay, now high intensity means high labor, high intensity management. So I'm a little worried, but he's very confident. So I'm going to advise him the best that I can, and we'll see how it goes. So, but he had prepared his area, he had taken his soil tests, waiting for the results to get back and such. But a high intensity orchard is you plant those apple trees about 5 foot apart. They're up on a trellis, and you tie the limbs. It's almost like a espalier. Have you ever seen the espalier like the French do, where they tie them and they, like I said, very high management intensive system. So that's what they're wanting to put out. But in that format or that type of production, you do get a lot of apples, and they're easier to pick. Most of them you use the dwarf varieties, and so they only get about 10, 12 foot tall. So you can pick them easily, but you're maintaining a very skinny tree with long branches, and they're hooked to a trellis. So, but pruning can also help to increase the density of a plant. We've talked about that. You take off the apical dominance, and it's going to cause that tree to bush up a little bit better. Hedges, espalier, all those are, they take a lot of work. So, I mean, they're cool looking. And if you buy one of those little puffball trees, a little juniper that's got the puffball and it's blank, puffball blank, it's going to grow in between eventually. But so it's kind of high maintenance to keep those trees in that shape. So if you kind of don't know where to start on your trees, you're going to want to look at the stand back and look. Okay, the tree, you want to do the misshapen branches, the crowded, the ones that are rubbing together or drooping onto other branches. You'll want to remove those first. Remove branches that have narrow crotch angles or the branches that cross over each other. And this, removing those branches with narrow crotch angles is kind of a preventative, and it eliminates problems before the plant damage occurs. Okay, so what I mean by a narrow crotch angle would be, if I look at my thumb, my fingers here, would be like a Bradford pear or a silver maple. Okay, so that's this would be your limb, and it's very tightly attached. And so it has a narrow crotch angle. This is not attached to the bark of the tree. And so when this limb gets a little bit of pressure on it, it's going to start pulling and pulling and pulling, and then it finally rips and it will pull the bark off. And like what you see with a Bradford pear after a windstorm. Okay, so if you can remove those branches that have, well, we also call it a codominant stem, that either have two stems that are real close together, you got to pick one. Take one off and leave the other that grows straight up into a central leader, and take off those ones that have the narrow crotch angle, because you kind of want it to be out like this and have some spacing. So that way they're stronger and they're better attached to the tree. So pruning can also stimulate or increase the flowering or fruiting. Many of your plants, if you prune them back a little bit, not the multiflora rose, the knockout roses. It's very important to prune those throughout the season. One thing that we've started to see, now I'm not going to say this always works, but the rosette disease that we see in knockout roses, you can eliminate a lot of that by pruning your buds off after they're spent, because there's a little bitty mite that gets in the petiole of the flower on a rose plant, and it spreads a virus that causes the rosette disease. So if you constantly prune and you throw out that infected material, then your plants are going to look a lot better, and you're going to reduce that disease or insect problem. So that's one way. If you're having problems with just roses in general, it's not just knockout, but they seem to be damaged the most by it. But just keep the flowers pruned back. That's called deadheading. And like I said, the first step, remove all broken, dead, we call it the 5 Ds, the dying, dead, deformed, damaged, and disease. And then we did some research on hazardous trees, and we also decided that we need to look out for cankers, conks, cracks, cavities, and crotches. Because, like I said, narrow crotch angle. Okay, think of if you're a tree climber. Okay, and you're just looking at a tree and you go climb that tree, and what if you reach up there and it has a cavity and it has a narrow crotch angle? What's going to happen? You're going to grab it, that limb's going to break, and you're going to fall out of the tree unless you're harnessed in correctly. So this was more for the climbers. So if you see conks, which are mushroom growth, they look like little stair step, turkey tail mushrooms. They can be at the base of the tree, they can come off the roots, or they can come off the side. If you see those within the tree, you know that it's given its last cry for help. And, this is it, okay? And because it's decaying from the inside, it has a heart rot. So at that point, you definitely need to be looking at having that tree removed. And so as a climber, when I'm going up a tree, I would be looking for these cankers, conks, and cracks, and things like that for my own safety. So, and then of course, remove any branches that cross over, or especially if they're rubbing against each other. And your branch that you remove should be cut back to its origin, or to a side branch that is at least 1/2 of its size. And I've got some pictures here to describe that. So the correct location for the cut is the swollen area known as the branch bark collar. And you do not want to ever leave a stub. Okay, I've had people argue with me that on evergreen trees, you're supposed to leave a stub. No. All it does is rot. And then, of course, you can see the fungi or bacteria have gained entry into the tree. And so leaving a stub, it just opens up a pathway for diseases and insects. And we usually recommend this 3-cut method. If you're taking off a large branch, you're going to take the weight off first. So you would take the majority of it off. You're going to do an undercut close to that branch bark ridge or the branch collar. And yeah, then you do your final cut. Because what you're wanting to avoid is that bark peeling and stripping off. So here's where I come in with my thumb thing. Okay, if you had to cut off your thumb, where would you cut it? Would you cut it here or would you cut it back here? Hold your thumbs up. Hold your thumbs up.
Right, the joint, not below the
Okay, you think way back here?
No. Not if I'm gonna cut my thumb, no. No, because you got your joint right here. You don't want to cut below your joint.
You're gonna cut it at the joint.
Yeah.
Okay,
You're trying to get rid of
Yep.
it completely.
okay, so
Below it,
yeah. So what we see here, you always have your thumb with you. Think of that as the branch bark collar. And so you're going to cut it here and it's going to make a good cut that's going to heal over. If you cut way back here, you're making a large wound and you're cutting into the cambium of the tree and you're causing more damage. And that wound will be less likely to heal, just like it would be harder if you cut half your hand off for all this to heal up, rather than just taking off the little bit of the finger. So that's how you do that.
Wasn't ready for that.
It's called a flush cut. is what that is. But here's your 3-cut method. Undercut the targeted branch about 10 to 12 inches from the tree, remove the weight, and then your final cut is just going to be a smooth cut at that branch bark ridge.
Now, do you need to paint that or anything
Oh,
or no?
no,
I always
No,
wondered that.
no, we don't use any paint, pruning tar, anything like that over the wound. Because if you're pruning at the right season, your tree should not be bleeding or oozing sap. You want to do it after a good hard freeze on most trees. And then so you don't have to seal them. Because another thing that we found is, again, it's a wound. You've wounded the tree. And if you have a cut and you put a Band-Aid on it and you keep a Band-Aid on it for days and days and days without it letting it get air, what happens? It festers
You
up.
want moist, not mushy. For a
Right.
wound.
You want it to be able to dry out. So you want it- yeah. So what happens when you put that tar on there, or it can, if there's any bacteria or fungi,
Says it
it
inside.
seals it inside, and then you get a heart rot of the tree. So that's another old myth that we're trying to get away from. No pruning tar or paint. And here is just another example of that branch collar where you want to make your cuts. If you have a codominant stem, and that just means that you've got 2 leaders coming up. And so you want to pick the strongest leader and take the other one off while that tree is young. Okay. And so you're going to make your cut at an angle. You would, like if you decide you're going to take this one off, you would cut it off at an angle, trying to make, as small as wound as possible. But get that off of there, and that other one will start to straighten up and it will branch out, and you'll have to prune to make sure that it's even on both sides or around. So, but you don't want codominant stems, because again, the Bradford pears, the silver maples, that's how they split. I mean, you can even see oak trees. I looked at an oak with Katie. It had 9 codominant branches. I was like,
Wow.
what in the world happened to this tree while it was young? Because I mean, it was huge, but it was 9 tree trunks about this big around. So, and it was rotten in the middle, which was bad. So, okay, we do go by the recommendations of the ISA, International Society of Arboriculture. I'm a certified arborist. Katie's a certified arborist. And I think there may be one more in Clarksville. So you don't find certified arborists very often, unfortunately. A lot of our tree care companies will be members of ISA, and at least that means that they are trying, that they're getting the education, it's available to them. If a tree company has topping in their advertisement, don't use them, go on to the next person, okay? Because topping is not a recommended practice and it's basically killing the trees. They just don't know it for a few years. So topping or heading back is not recommended. We talk in terms of crown reduction, drop crotch pruning, things like that. And so what you see the utility companies doing sometimes that may not look right to you is actually crown reduction or drop crotch pruning. And I really don't like drop crotch pruning because that one way they do that is rather than take down the whole tree, you got the power line coming through here and they will take out the center of the tree and they'll leave what's on either side. Okay. Now, sometimes if it's a strong tree, that's okay, but it can also weaken the tree. And then when you get ice or pressure, it will split. But typically, again, if it's under the power lines, it's in the wrong place anyway, and it really needs to be removed and something else planted. You know what? I think people think that it's a nice straight line and they plant their trees right under the power lines. I don't know, but I mean, people do it. Some of the trees are just there naturally, they've just been there and then the power lines came through. But we can try as homeowners and just to be conscious about where we plant trees and how close we plant them to the power lines. We've got some lists, that will give you names of smaller trees to plant under power lines, but you want to stay away from them if at all possible, because electricity is more important than a tree. I mean, if you think the bottom line, you want electricity or do you want that tree? So
Power lines in the ground.
oh, you've got to be careful of that too. And so call 811. That's the call before you dig, because you don't want to cut into your cable, your gas
They got put on
line, your
hold.
electric.
You got put on hold, but, oh, could you please hold? I never talked to a person when I tried that.
I just go online.
Yeah, they come like the next day.
Yep, boom.
Wait,
I don't call anybody anymore. Just go online.
Yeah, I tried calling, did not work out.
Do it online. You just fill out a little form and they'll come out. Next thing you know, you'll have little lines all across
I
your
don't even tell you.
landscape.
Come home and know.
Yeah, like water lines are blue, the cable's yellow or something like that. I forget what the colors stand for, but just go to the website, 811, call
The
before you
website's-
dig.
The website's called 811 or call before you dig.
One or the other.
I
I
imagine you
remember
Google
those.
either of those things.
Yeah. Okay, more about topping. Topping is just the cutting back the branches to stubs or lateral branches without any thought to the shape, the natural form, or the health of the tree. Okay, so when you top a tree, basically they'll just cut it flat. And when you have a flat area, your water settles. Again, you're going to have decay. You're going to have weak branches that come out at the end of that stub. And those weak branches, or those branches, are weakly attached. And so if they have any pressure from the wind or ice or storms, they're going to break off. And so has anybody ever had a top tree in their yard? Anybody admit to it? Maybe you inherited it. Okay, you didn't do it. You inherited it. How's that? Have you noticed though that you have a lot of limbs?
I've seen
that are
where they tried
falling
to cut the tree
from
and the root
Yeah.
is growing all kinds of stuff out of it then.
Okay, this is a little different. This would be like hitting like a huge maple tree or an oak tree really, really hard and taking off 3/4 of its canopy and just leaving big stubs. And so when those stubs, they come out with a lot of epichloric growth is actually what you call it. All these little branches here are just going to be weakly attached, and as they grow, they break off and they fall to the ground. Then you've got the fungi or the bacteria that rots the wood, and so that just continues and continues. And the trees kind of put out a signal that they're in stress. And so then the insects can pick up on that, the pheromones, the hormones that they put out. Hey, sick tree over here, boom, let's go get it. And so they talk to each other. So, so this is a bad habit. We don't recommend it. We're, as part of the tree board, we work constantly with CDE mainly for them to change their practices. So they are a tree line clearance USA, which means they're supposed to be following the arborist recommendations. Clarksville is a tree city USA. I think for 30 some years now, we've had the Tree City USA designation, and that means we've got a tree board, we've got a city forester, and we've got a management plan, and we do outreach. So if you're interested in learning more about the tree board, just let me know on that one too, because we are looking for members. But we're kind of everybody tells us, what's a tree board? You guys, you have a tree board? So it's basically to advise the city forester and to look out for our community trees. Okay, just a few more things. I just wanted to go over some of your basic pruning cuts. Heading cuts are made just above a node. You guys remember what a node was, then an internode, okay? So you're just kind of, it's not really shearing, but it's just a heading cut. Maybe you're taking 2 to 3 inches off just to keep the shape on that tree. And that's gonna encourage the shoots to grow outward and produce kind of a spreading type shrub. You may want to even get pickier and choose the branches that are, or the buds that are facing outward rather than inward. So that would cause crowding. Thinning cuts, you're just going in again and you're picking and choosing what you want to pull out to thin that shrub. Forsythia, Spirea, Weigelia, the Mahonia, and Nandina need to be pruned this way. I hate to see a topped Nandina. It's almost as bad as a crepe myrtle. Okay, a crepe murder. So instead of just rounding off the top where it would usually takes away the berries or the flowers that are going to form later. So you're just going to go in and you're going to pick and choose. And basic rule of thumb is to prune them right after they flower. Okay, that's with all plants. If you can't remember anything else, prune them immediately after they flower, because most of them, you know, they start producing their buds for the next year right after that. So a severe renewal pruning. This is one that, I mean, you could do it some with boxwoods, not as much. They're kind of persnickety. But if you have, again, like the Weigelia, if you have crepe myrtle, you know, any shrub that has just gone crazy and you just want to get it, you know, cut it back to the ground, just do a severe renewal pruning and it will come back the next year. So you're cutting all the branches within several inches of the ground. And so if that plant has a good root system and it's been there for years, it's going to take this type of pruning and it will come back the next year. Then you choose the branches that you want to keep or you want to get rid of. Shearing is a major time commitment and it looks nice. A lot of our formal gardens that we like to go see and visit, or you know, where they have people that they get paid to do this, or else it's just a hobby. You know, some people just like to shear their shrubs and have this very formal look. Usually you'll see it at the front of the house, leads people to the door, you know, they know where to go in and all this good stuff. Usually your evergreens, yew, arborvitae, hemlock are often sheared. Now you can shear too closely, and I go out and I look at boxwoods a lot. Once you've gone in and you've gotten rid of all the green and now you're getting holes here and there, that means that you've pruned it too hard. You've sheared it too hard and it's probably never going to come back to its natural shape just because of the way that evergreens grow. So be careful. I mean, when you know, you can shear them just a little bit, take off maybe 1/3 of the growth at one time. That's another rule of thumb. And you may have to do it 2 or 3 times to get that plant back to where it needs to be, but don't prune real hard, especially on boxwoods, because they just don't like it. Huh?
I thought we got rid of the thumb.
We got, yeah, I'm sorry. We still got a rule of thumb.
You hold on to it, just not attached to it.
Yeah,
You know that
yeah.
other thing, you know,
You just stick in your pocket.
Your uncle used to do that thing to you?
Okay. We can, yeah. You guys want to hear about fruit tree production tonight, or you want to wait? I'll give a quick. Okay. Central leader training is for apples and pears. Basically, you're going to keep that central leader and prune like any other tree. On, oops. Now, this is where people have the problems of when you're going to plant. When you get those little trees in the mail, you got to cut off the top, cut off all the side branches. Okay. Then you start letting a few branches form, and you're going to prune each year. What you wanted to do is create those scaffold branches that are about 18 inches apart up and down the stem is what you're going for. And so, but you do, you need to do that off with your head thing right at the first. So leave the one trunk for a central leader. We'll go over this during the fruit class, but here's kind of an example. You want to make your cuts. If you're wanting your bud to go outward, you're going to make your cut on the opposite side of that bud. So that bud will develop into a branch. You may have to do some topping of it. And okay, the stone fruits are a little bit different. Peach, we can't grow nectarine very well. Nectarines and plum cots are two things we don't recommend in Tennessee. Peach varieties, you need to be careful with. Cherry varieties, you need to get the ones that bloom later, that are drought tolerant of our conditions here in Tennessee. So, but anyway, these stone fruits need to be pruned into a face shape, which means you take out the central leader and you're concentrating on this part. You want it to be kind of a vase shape. And so any of them that would be growing inside, you would take those off and encourage outer growth like
And
that.
that won't cause a splitting.
Nope, nope, not if you do it correctly, because these branches in the middle are going to be strongly attached. So, but peaches, the stone fruits have so many disease problems. This type of a training system allows better air circulation to come through so the leaves can dry off and you have less disease problems. So the fungal diseases are intense on peach trees, on the stone fruits. So when you get the tree, and it may look like this, have all kinds of branches on it, you're going to lop the top or lop the middle right out of it. And that's what it would look from an aerial view. So just kind of looks like a wagon wheel. Okay. So timing, a plant's energy reserves are highest during the dormant seasons, periods of winter, and then they're lowest during spring growth. So we want to prune in the fall or in the winter, okay? Because they've got plenty of energy reserves. They've gone through photosynthesis and they're putting those reserves down in the roots so that when you go to prune up here, you're not going to be taking away all its sugar and its energy, okay? Now, if you prune during spring, especially maples, we do maple syrup in the spring, right? Okay, so you prune a maple or a linden or willow early in the spring, you're liable to see a lot of sap oozing. I remember one year, I was kind of a younger agent at one time, and but I went to see this tree, and it was a maple tree, and it was literally dripping. I mean, I had never seen such thing in my life. I was standing under it, and it was just dripping sap. But it was a water maple, and we'd had a lot of rain, and then we had a drought. And for some reason, that tree just decided to, I mean, thought it was disaster or something.
It lived though, right? It's good.
It lived. Yeah, it was fine. Yeah, we we talked to the lady. I was like, well, you could probably tap it and make maple syrup if you wanted to. You'd get a lot. So, but late summer, early fall are poor times to prune. Your maples can actually be pruned during the summer months because they are bleeders and they've kind of leveled off during during the summer months, and the sap is starting to go down in the fall. So late summer, early fall on maple trees is okay. Okay.
So people who grow like sugar maples, whichever ones are used for the sap to make the syrup, when is the best time to tap them? This in spring?
Usually around February, March. Now, I've
Usually
never done this myself.
And where on the tree?
It's usually about midway up the trunk. I mean, a lot of people, I guess it'd be
Don't go
about
too far up.
a foot or so up. I've never done it, but I've seen it. But they put like little needles in the tree, and it'll be a tube that leads to a bucket. And the sap will just ooze right in that bucket, and then you take the bucket and you boil it and make a syrup out of it.
There's funny YouTube videos on how to do that.
Yeah.
I've actually
10
seen it.
inches
There's
away
a
from
friend up
last
in New
year's
York
tap.
who used to make their own maple syrup, and they go in there, they tap all their trees, and it's still cold out.
But you need the freeze thaw for the sap to really flow.
Right,
Right.
You need like freeze it late, then thaw, so it builds the pressure and release it out.
right.
Good syrup.
Okay, so the best time to prune is going to be late winter, early spring before the buds swell. Less possibility of freeze damage. The plants have plenty of stored energy. You may reduce the amount of flowering on spring flowering shrubs, but it may be necessary to prune to maintain that desired growth. Birch, elm, maple, yellowwood, they are all known to be bleeders. And so when they are pruned in the spring, they're gonna ooze a lot of sap. And so your trees and shrubs should be examined on an annual basis. Okay, as a general rule, plants that flower before July 1st should be pruned immediately after flowering. So your azaleas, your forsythia, lilac, viburnum. These plants develop their flower buds on the previous season's wood. So pruning in July is going to promote shoot growth and allow time for those flower buds to develop for the next season. Plants that bloom after July 1st should be pruned in late winter, early spring before the plant or before growth starts. So that would be your crepe myrtle, rose of Sharon, butterfly bush, and some hydrangeas. Now hydrangeas can be picky about when they like to be pruned. So there's a lot of different varieties. So again, study up on which variety you have and the pruning recommendations for that particular plant. And plants that are prized for their fruiting should not be pruned until the fruit has lost its beauty. Like with the nandinas, I like to wait until the winter months. I like in November and December to have those berries to use for decorations on the tables. You know, and even some of my evergreens, I'll clip the evergreens and I'll pick the nandina berries, you know, to make displays and things like that. So, but thinly, lightly prune the branches, just thin them out. But pyracantha is a good one. It has nice, pretty berries, holly, barberry, cotoneaster, and the nandina. So conifers, our evergreens, are a little bit different animals. And so they are pruned completely at a different time of year. And typically you prune evergreens in June. And depending on what type of an evergreen, like if you have your different types of pine trees, you will see them candling. Okay, and it just looks like a little candle coming out on the end. Usually you cut off about 1/2 to 3/4 of that candle, and that will help you to keep that triangular shape. If you think about what the Christmas tree growers do, you know, they'll come in and they'll either have, you know, a large knife that they will go around and print. Have you ever seen somebody print? Oh, that's cool. I mean, because they go through with like 2 knives, and you handle them. You got this perfectly triangular tree, and they have these other things that come in. It's a big piece of machinery that goes down on the tree like that. It goes, and it's got it just cuts it and shapes it into that Christmas tree shape. That doesn't just happen naturally. It takes some work, and it usually occurs in June that they do that. So we do have a couple Christmas tree farms. So if you think about it, when you go to visit them during the winter to get your Christmas tree, ask them when they're going to prune and if you can come back and watch in June, late May and June. So when you're pruning young trees, you remember you're just pruning from the time you get that tree. Only prune back what you absolutely have to. But all cuts should be made back to a node or back to the next limb. Don't leave stubs. Don't remove more than 1/3 of that live growth at one time. And then to develop that strong, straight trunk, you're going to start pruning early in the life of the tree and just remove the unnecessary branches. So kind of a goal is that you want those branches spaced 6 to 12 inches apart. This is in a perfect world too, people. I don't know very many people that are this precise on pruning. So, but if you have closely spaced branches, you're going to have a lot of disease problems and poor structural strength and such like that. So you want to choose your strong branches to keep and cut back the weak ones. So mature trees, you should focus on maintaining the tree structure, the form, the health, and the appearance. If you have a large tree that's overgrown or it's losing a lot of large branches, you probably want to call a qualified tree person, an arborist, to come in and examine that tree. And if they have a bucket, they can actually go up and look at the top of the tree and see what's going on. Because even I take my binoculars with me when I go out to look at trees, and I can see a lot, but if it's got two, like the codominant stems or such like that, I can't really see unless I get to the top of the tree and look down. And I don't climb anymore.
So
So
bucket either.
I don't do a bucket either. Not unless I'm just pointing, you cut that limb, you cut that limb. There's our topping pictures, and all these were taken in Clarksville. Nice hat rack, this is a habit that we do not want.
It's so sad.
It's sad. It is. We drove by one the other day, and my son was with me, and I was like, I hear the trees crying. So, but we already talked about this. It just drastically shortens the life of the tree. They're disfigured. You just can't get the natural shape back. And it's contagious. You'll have one person in your neighborhood that has Mr. Hackensack come through. Oh, I want my trees to look like that too. And the next thing you know, half the block has top trees. So I don't know. It's like I said, it's infectious. They're not supposed to be doing that. But we have two. We have CDE and we have CEMC, and they both contract their work out. And so sometimes if you see, you may need to call the line clearance person, especially if it's on your property. If you're on CDE, just call, or CEMC, and ask to talk to their line clearance person. Tell them you want them to come out and look at how your trees were pruned, that you're not happy.
Like they leave
So,
half, and then they take the other half.
yes,
But
yes, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Yes, sir.
Seen trees with helicopters
Oh, no.
in my backyard. Leaves a big mess behind.
Because they were landing or because,
Right down power lines.
Really? I had never seen that. No.
I heard this helicopter in my backyard for like 5 minutes, and they fly along the river all the time.
Yeah.
So
Oh my gosh.
I heard it for so long, it sounds like it's in the backyard. So I went backyard, sure enough, it was this little yellow helicopter
Oh my
going
goodness.
along the power line.
it does not sound safe.
Huh. Using the helicopter blades?
He said they were using the actual blade to do
Oh, they had a cable with saws come down.
it? Yeah.
I was thinking the helicopter was.
No, no, no. I'm just thinking that doesn't sound very safe, hanging out of the helicopter. So they're hanging out of the helicopter?
Hey, I've never seen them do that.
They're hanging out of the helicopter doing it? They're what?
Table things from below the helicopter, they was flying a straight line on power lines. Cut every tree.
Be darned.
It's very messy.
Yeah.
Just trying to see where that
I
person
would
is.
just
Yeah.
The amazing thing was is all the branches fell away from the power lines. That's how we did.
Wow. That is interesting.
That's worth a YouTube video, man, I'm telling you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess that is the end. Okay, well, we are done for tonight, and hopefully my speaker next week doesn't get sick. You know who the speaker is next week.
You.
I really didn't plan it this way. But, okay.
Such a trooper you are.
All right. I'm trying to get anyone to see this. Okay, so Carol is interested in the tree board. Okay, Carol, send me an email to remind me that you're interested in the tree board, and I can send you the form that you fill out to be on the city board. Okay. Oh. Okay, send me an email to remind me. This is gonna be a crazy week.
So this is where I'm